Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leaders Talk podcast. Now, you might not have ever seen us before on this show, so my name's Gaia, and I'm joined by
Janelle.
And welcome to today's episode. Today, we are going to be presenting to you the topic of how does STEM influence society? And maybe a little bit more importantly, how can we use STEM and what we learn from STEM and the projects from it to make society a better place? Now, you're probably asking yourself, and if you haven't seen any other episodes, you're definitely asking yourself this. These two people look very young. How are they qualified to talk about this? Well, let's say who we are, and then maybe we'll be able to answer that question. So I'm one of your two hosts today. My name is Gaia. I'm a fifth-year student of mathematics, physics, and computer science, and way too many other things at the University of New Brunswick in Fredericton. And I was the winner of the 2018 Schulich Leader Scholarship, which is how I got on this little podcast. For a bit about me, I am a podcast host who's been podcasting on and off for many years, though most of my podcasts are on radio rather than online, so you won't see them here. As well, I'm a member of my local student government, Senate, board, etc. I've dealt with multiple clubs in my time. I've done many research projects, and I was an actual candidate in a governmental political election. Yeah. And Janelle, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Gaia. So I'm the other podcast host today. I'm Janelle. I'm an incoming software engineering student at McGill, and I'm also a recipient of the 2023 Schulich Leader Scholarship. So that was just like a few months ago. So I am very new, very young, but still here today. I also work on the side as an IT manager at a local BC charity. I founded an organization to teach students about homelessness and alleviate the isolation of the issue through some card making. I've also volunteered to develop an app for UBC study just throughout high school and such. So today, given that I am still pretty young, I have sort of a present position of someone who is learning. So contrasted by Gaia, who's kind of gone through like almost all of uni, we think we have a pretty interesting dynamic here today.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get back to that question quickly. How are we qualified to be talking about this today, to teach in some ways the people who are listening? And the answer is we're not experts in the field, but we have experience. This isn't meant to be the be-all end-all of your time learning about bettering the world with STEM, but the starting point from two people who have lived their lives in STEM and are trying to make the world a better place, from two very different perspectives from opposite ends of Canada. So hopefully throughout this episode, you'll get a good understanding of how we'll make the world a better place. And we're going to do so through three main questions, which I'll introduce now, and then we'll be ready to jump into them. So the three questions we're first going to be asking today is, how has STEM affected society in any ways, either in our own lives or globally? Then we're going to be going into, how does being unaware of the effects of STEM possibly cause harm in society? So going really into the negatives there. And we're going to be concluding with how we can use STEM to better influence society. So that gives a rough roadmap of the episode, and I think we're ready to jump into it. Janelle, why don't you start us off?
All right, so we're going to start off with, how does STEM affect society? So this is a pretty big question, and I would say that it's a pretty obvious, it seems as if there are pretty obvious answers. Like, there are examples that we all know, right? For instance, medicine, cell phones, etc. I think we can all agree that STEM is often the solution to so many human problems in our lives. So if we think back historically to how STEM has influenced the world, we can look at how we had the problem with like a need for more transportation. We had a need for global communication. We had a need for databases to store all our information. And STEM historically has always been the answer to all of these problems through like the onset of vehicles, of cars, of the internet and things like that. And I think we can sort of agree that the more knowledge we have about how the world works, the more equipped we are to actually create new solutions. In fact, I would say that that's the main purpose of the field of engineering. And for me personally, going into engineering in university, that's sort of like the appeal to me, the power we have to really change society by using STEM.
So if I can ask, STEM is all
course.
about how we can build a better society. That's kind of like the summary of what STEM kind of is. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, of course. And I don't know, there is this one company in particular that I've sort of always been drawn to, Google X. It's very, very big because it's part of Google. But they do some really cool work that I thought would be interesting to share with you all. So if you don't know, Google X is essentially a sub-branch of Google, and they are essentially considered like a very radical branch, and they work on projects that they call moonshot projects to essentially improve the lives of millions of people in the world by tackling really important world and like social issues. And they do this through a lot of research, through a lot of collaboration with people and experts from all across the world. And they're working on one really cool project in particular right now called Tidal. And essentially, it works to address both climate change in the oceans, as well as the global food shortage by like an increase in population, by improving upon like current technology, through advanced monitoring, camera systems, things like that. It's a super cool project. And it kind of just shows us how companies like this are really working on solutions to modern day issues. And STEM is sort of what our world is using to make the world a better place, hopefully, and solve all of these problems.
Yeah. So allow me to jump in there a bit. So what Janelle you just told the audience and me, is STEM is the building of the world around us and trying to solve very serious global problems through probably a more scientific engineering method. I mean, I guess it is in the name for that. But I would also have to ask you, did STEM begin with computers?
I
No,
would.
it began much earlier, right? So what else has STEM created for us? And a quick answer to this is pretty much everything post-industrial revolution, to be honest. Now, we think of science today as scientific methods, people in lab coats, and maybe engineers working on massive projects and drawing up designs, and maybe your professors or teachers that you've had in school whenever you took school for yourself. But STEM includes a wide variety of things as well. For example, it includes mechanized farming equipment and other mechanization that began to start the entire industrial revolution, right? It includes the first major steamships and the steam engine, and includes the light bulb and the invention of electricity, or at least our ability to control it. STEM has quite genuinely built the world around us. And it's not just an attempt to solve the problems that we're facing now, but it solved the problems that we were facing in the past. You can thank STEM today for your gaming consoles, but you can also thank STEM today for antibiotics, right?
Exactly.
So
It's
STEM
just a
has
very.
very seriously improved the world around us. But here's a question for you. Has STEM always improved the world around us? So
That's
let's
really
get into
true.
that. STEM is not always a force of good. There's no way to say STEM is objectively a morally good thing. It's amoral. It exists fundamentally to answer questions. What STEM is it's the attempt to answer how. How does this work? How do we build this? How do we fix this? How do we improve this? How do we solve this problem? And while many people in STEM will spend their entire lives also attempting to answer why, that's not exactly what at least the technology and engineering side of STEM do. They might ask, why is the electricity flowing the way it is? Why is this thing not working? But it's really the question of how do we fix it? But in real life, our problems are not simply distribution issues. The food crisis today is not a question. Well, I guess, yeah, actually, the food crisis today is very specifically a question of how do we get food over there, but how do we help people over there? What causes people to go hungry, right? The climate crisis is just as much how do we stop climate change to who is being hurt by climate change and why? Because that's where we need to be focusing our efforts, right? So what field of study genuinely attempts to answer these whys? And well, I mean, I have my notes document in front of me. Let's be quite honest here. It's not like I came without a script. That's not STEM. It's the humanities. So Janelle and I met a few days ago to talk about this. And for you as the audience, it lets you know a little bit about the background of preparing these podcasts. We do meet and discuss these topics beforehand. And so Janelle, I'm going to ask you, what is the difference between STEM and the humanities? Because it's not as fundamental as people think, but it's also still pretty big.
And I would say it's what you just pointed to and alluded to very, very well. STEM asks how, while humanity asks why. Like the why that you mentioned is so important to solving all these major issues. So for instance, I remember when we were originally chatting about this, we talked about how so many engineers and people working in STEM often focus on just the solving the problem itself and creating the solution without often considering the ethical implications of it and how the solution they create actually impacts the people who are using it, whether that is positively or negatively. So for instance, I have a very generic example here, but I once talked to someone who worked on like this really interesting application feature, but it was essentially to minimize the amount of time workers would spend on restroom breaks by literally optimizing every single minute of their day. So I think we can ask ourselves, is this a good tool? Is this a good feature? Is it positively impacting these workers? Or is it actually making their lives maybe worse? Maybe it's causing more stress. Maybe it's impacting mental well-being in a super negative way.
Mhm.
And I don't know, what do you think about this, Gaia?
Yeah. So I think what STEM lacks is critical analysis. Now, if you're a scientist and you're listening to this episode, you probably got very angry at that line because you would think, I critically analyze everything I do. It's me crying over my exam papers, right? But that's not critical analysis in the strict sense. What critical analysis is, it's the genuine attempt to sit down and think about every aspect of a piece of whatever you're looking at, of a problem or anything, and not just asking what direct effect is causing this, but also how did that effect happen? How did that happen? How did that happen and why? Why would someone make a decision that leads to this? A good example of a problem that STEM can't answer is, or at least not fully, is why is it that cities with very extensive programs to help homeless people still have homeless people when they have enough capacity, people hired, and resources? Because capacity, design, construction, and implementation are STEM problems. And the answer is psychology. The answer is sociology. The answer is stigma and bias and personal situations that STEM isn't going to easily take into account. And you're not going to get there by just thinking, if people are homeless, let's build homeless shelters for them, right? You might not even come to the conclusion that far naturally. Let me give one of my favorite examples. I recently worked on a research paper that was well within the political science field, so very involved in the humanities. And my paper was, how do communities online affect a person's political views? And I took a very STEM focused approach, right? I found people in this community are likely to move towards this community because there's this much overlap between them. And then that second community and the third one overlap as well. And you could plot the course of someone going from centrist political communities on, let's say, Reddit to very far right or far left or very extreme communities by following this pathway of connections. And what I didn't ask this entire time yet is, why are people doing that in the first place? And the answers are a million and one things, but one of the key ones is isolation. Not isolation from their friends, but a feeling of isolation or being unimportant in their own life. And me plotting these pathways never gave that answer, right? But this isn't just how being unaware of the effects of STEM can cause harm to people, right? Like, Janelle, you and I discussed this a bit earlier, but there is really the question of, has STEM endorsed evil in its past in the attempt to do good? And I know evil is a strong word. You hear evil and it's red flags immediately. You're panicked about it. STEM can't be evil. It's morally neutral, but STEM is just solving problems, right? Now, there's some very extreme examples here, like the fact that the old eugenics movement was fundamentally part of STEM. It was accepted science for a very, very long time. Now, obviously, it's not anymore. Why? Because people with critical analysis abilities sat down, looked at it, and said, here's the harm that these policies would cause. But here's another example. The concept of IQ comes from STEM. Our entire concept of IQ comes from doing statistical analysis on test data to attempt to find a single number to represent how good someone is overall. And that's a STEM approach. That's stats. That's fundamentally math. And it's not necessarily harmful to get a single number to represent how good a person is at their courses or their work. That's what your GPA is, after all, right? But what happened is people started assigning value to this IQ, and you'll meet organizations even today that won't let you register for the organization if your IQ isn't higher than 130, or they fundamentally like discriminate against people with low IQs, right? just as much, you can find studies that will show whatever you want. If you want to find a STEM study that shows that some people get hurt by vaccines, you can. And that's not going to fight the overwhelming STEM that, vaccines help people, but you can find studies that show harm and side effects, because side effects do exist, however rare they are. So very real, STEM isn't morally good. It can cause harm. And some of the greatest evils in our society have come from STEM. But anyways, I've reached the point in my talking where I'm listening to my own voice in my head. So why don't I throw this back to you, Janelle? So we know that STEM can cause harm, and it's pretty morally neutral. So how do we deal with that?
That's a really good question. And I think the question is now, how can we positively influence society? Because I think that's what we all want, right? We want to create a better world. We want to create a happier world. We want to create a world with more peace. And I think at this point, we need to think about the importance of sort of being interdisciplinary and taking in all these accounts into our work and thinking deeper about the work that we do. I think a lot of people in STEM tend to often over-specialize in their field. They tend to become very, very good at one thing, whether it be programming, whether it be doing research or something like that. And they often tend to forget about the importance of communication, of relating to people, of thinking about the sociology, of the psychology. I think there is a pretty good example. I remember reading about like some schools that are opening in some cities where they focus on delivering some very specific STEM-oriented programs to high school students. And essentially these programs basically give students the opportunity to become very good at a STEM field by exposing them to a whole bunch of STEM fields at a very accelerated pace when they're very young, with the goal of them being super specialized STEM experts that can make positive change on the world. But then with that over-specialization in STEM, they're often missing that humanities component of getting an adequate exposure to that field. So how can we give people an adequate exposure to the humanities and integrate that into STEM so that we can really approach these issues with a very multidisciplinary lens? Gaia, do you want to maybe share an anecdote or personal story here?
Yeah, sure. So I've talked a lot in my introduction and in my previous discussion of my work with political science and government. But a good example of this is that paper that I mentioned earlier, where I did a STEM focus analysis of Reddit communities, wasn't only a STEM only analysis. After that section in the paper, I spent a very long time asking the questions of why. And I spent a long time asking, how do social media sites take steps to deal with this? And that was because I wrote that paper after attending a course, admittedly in Europe, as part of student abroad at my school, on poli-sci, on dealing with these types of problems, on dealing with populism, on dealing with extremist political ideologies and addressing them, right? In my own experience, engaging with things outside of the realm of STEM gave me knowledge within my realm of STEM on how to do better. Though, of course, I'm a mathematics researcher who works on things that will probably never reach the point of causing harm, but thinking that way is how it does start to reach the point of causing harm. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I know for me too, I remember actually in my Schulich application, I was debating on how much I should talk about my organization related to homelessness because it was humanities related. I thought because Schulich is a STEM-based scholarship, maybe I should focus more on my STEM involvement, even though I think I probably dedicated the most time in high school to the organization. In the end, I ended up dedicating maybe like 30% of my essay on the organization, which I think was like a pretty good amount. But I think it was important to bring up nonetheless, because being involved in humanities, being involved in like that humanities sector, learning about homelessness, the historical context and all that gave me a unique lens on social issues that I was able to integrate into my other STEM projects, very similar to you. It allowed me to be more cognizant about the different experiences of people in society, of the multifaceted societal issues and systemic issues that lead into these problems that are so difficult to solve. In fact, much of my later work, for instance, like working on that domestic violence study and everything, was driven by the fact that I wanted to help more people because I saw how important it is to support people who might be a little bit more vulnerable. And I wouldn't have gained those insights without that original involvement in the humanities. And in general, it's just so important to really be informed about these issues in our community, to stay updated with the news, to follow along and learn a bit more about why issues in our society exist, so that we can see how we can use our different skill sets to create meaningful change. And this is all just so important, having this genuine desire to fix the world. And it won't be possible to achieve like our final goal, I suppose, of making the world a positive place if we don't have all these different lenses at our disposal. Do you agree, Gaia?
Yeah, I agree. The end result is we know STEM will make the world a better place through innovation and careful design and coming up with new ideas to build new things. Your cell phone is a product of that. But the big takeaway is if you want to make a better society rather than more things for society, it's really being careful of the impacts, thinking through these things and undergoing critical analysis. To be better in STEM, you have to use the humanities. This is why we study them. To make the world a better place, you have to think about the world, not just what the world uses. And really, I think that covers most things that we had so far. Was there anything else on this topic that you wanted to bring up? Any personal stories or ideas you might have?
Nope, I think you pretty much covered it all.
Well, maybe I can throw a little bit of a sudden question at you. We can edit
All
this
right.
out later if you don't want. If you had to pick one of a few things, maybe more recently in STEM, that had some of the most positive impact, what would you pick?
That's a really good question. I think to sort of twist the question around, I mean, there's one everyone knows, which is the advent of AI. I would say something like AI has so many impacts, both positive and negative. So I'd love to like touch upon that a bit. So for instance, with the advent of ChatGPT, GPT-4, all those like AI, chat, bots, everything, we know the positive impacts that they have. They make our lives easier, right? They answer our questions. They're able to take all these resources from the internet that they've learned and collected and been trained upon and synthesize them to create the answer that we need to create something new entirely. And I remember the first time I used like ChatGPT, I was literally blown away. I was like, holy crap, this is like the coolest tool I have ever used. This is going to change my life. I hope this is free. I hope this stays free and like, things like that, right? But then it has a lot of positive impacts, right? It saves people time. It's helping people write things, right? But then there are also some questionable things as well. We heard about people I think in the very beginning, using ChatGPT to create instructions for how to deploy a bomb, which is ridiculous, and only humans would be able to come up with something like that. But I think it sort of goes to show that something with preconceivably very, very positive impacts, because it's AI, it's going to change the world, it's going to revolutionize everything, also has a lot of unintended repercussions depending on human use that you often don't think about until you consider the fact that we are humans and humans sometimes do very stupid things.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty well known within the field of AI that your biggest problem is an AI is just a trained data set that repeats back to you things from the data set. And to give some examples on how AI can actually be harmful, there's a lot of discussion going around right now that ChatGPT has racial stereotypes baked into it from its data set. Right. There's a post about this on gizmodo.com, which I have to admit is the first and only time I've ever been on this website, but it links to studies on this topic, but also how there was a recent story of a lawyer who used ChatGPT to help get some data for a case, and ChatGPT referenced a number of past cases until the lawyer got to court, and all of those cases were made up by the AI. They never happened. They never existed. The AI fundamentally created cases and historical precedent out of thin air to answer the question the lawyer had asked it, right? And AI is just one tool that everybody's thinking about now. It's a new buzzword everyone has on their lips, but these are two very real problems, that your data sets could be biased, the information could be biased. You could ask ChatGPT to pretend to be your now deceased grandmother who would tell you stories on how to make napalm, well, to help you fall asleep, and it will tell you how to make napalm, although I think they patched that specific one out now. This is something that AI can do. And AI has the chance to genuinely revolutionize society in a massively positive way and to build a better world. But it also has these fundamental problems baked in, and it's not like they're going to suddenly go away without people thinking about them and trying to fix them, right? So if we want to make a better world, we can't just make the things that could make the world better. It's analyzing if they will actually make the world better. It's very easy to go into something with great intentions and to then fail horribly in the end.
And I think what kind of showcases this so perfectly is, I would say, I think just a few months after ChatGPT was released, a whole bunch of like billionaires and tech people were like, wait, maybe we should have some policies in place, given that this tool is very powerful and it's probably too powerful than what humanity can handle right now, right? It sort of showcases that we really need to consider the effects of the things that we create in the world and whether or not humanity is ready for them. And if we aren't, then how can we be? What can we inform ourselves about so that we can create the tools that will genuinely help society rather than create more destruction in the world?
Yeah. So for you as a listener who has come to listen to two undergraduates talk for now 25 minutes about ChatGPT and humanities and science, what should you take away from this? If I had to give one piece of advice, it's go take a sociology course. If I had to give maybe something a little bit easier, it's start thinking outside of the box in terms of what your product or invention or project could do and how it could be harmful. Because once you recognize the possible harms, well, you can prepare to avoid that and, make the world a better place in the process. And what about you, Janelle? What advice would you possibly give someone listening to this episode?
I think the advice I would give would be to treat all the things that you create as an opportunity to make the world a better place, to use your skills and to use the many talents and gifts that you have, to really try to improve the lives of those around you. And it comes down to thinking about the who behind everything. Who are you impacting? Whose lives do you want to better? How are you impacting them? And will the thing that you create actually have that effect that you want? And I think having that mentality in mind, wanting to make the world a better place and thinking about the who first and foremost before the how or the what will be how we all kind of all achieve our goals, which is to make humanity a better place.
Yeah, and that covers everything. As a final note for me, if you do happen to build a product that tracks Elon Musk's private jet everywhere it goes, yeah, that's a benefit to society. That's a good thing from STEM. Anyways, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you want to hear more from us at any time, I have all my social media is just my name at Gaia Noseworthy. Janelle, do you have anywhere where if people want to see what projects you're working on?
I have my LinkedIn, which I can plug. It's just Janelle Tam on LinkedIn. Yeah, that's my LinkedIn, like if you want to see what I'm involved in. Yeah, thank you, Gaia.
Yeah, and thank you, Janelle. Thank you for coming today. Thanks for working on this episode with me. And that covers everything. So thank you to the listener for listening and or watching today's episode. And we hope either we or the next host will see you on the next episode of the Leaders Talk podcast. Have a good one.
Take care.